really, considering our size, I mean, like you said, it's not Sydney, it's not Melbourne, but considering how isolated we are and how relatively small we are, really, we've got a thriving little art scene up here. It's kind of cool, really.
Yeah, it's incredibly inspiring. I think I have drawn a lot of inspiration more so from the visual arts, the painters, the drawers, the sketches, and yeah, you know, going on to their shows, and it's just like, wow, you guys are so supportive of each other. With the gigs and stuff, it's a little bit hard for musicians to be able to make it to other musician shows because everybody's trying to earn a living and that kind of thing. So you have different Facebook pages for musicians where we get to talk to each other and that kind of thing. But you are certainly on point there. We do have a lot of artists here, and everybody seems to be working hard to benefit themselves and benefit their craft and their art, and hopefully, you know, help each other. And at the same time, it's such a great thing for the community that there are diverse things happening, that it's not just sort of football and then after football we go to here and that kind of thing, that people still do have a bit of an option to get out and see something a bit different and then talk about it to their friends. You know, we went and saw a band, or we went and saw this art show, or whatever it is. And I think that's a really important part of our community, isn't it, at large? So if it's here, I think we're doing a good thing.
Absolutely. I always wondered, it seemed to me strange that I always thought SARS, my God, COVID, just by way of explanation, I was in China when SARS happened, so sometimes in my head I mix it up.
Okay, yep.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't all that bad. I got to stay inside and drink a lot of beer. But I always thought COVID would really kill things. And it does seem to have smashed the entertainment and the musician side of things. But I've noticed in the same way, when you clip a bush back or you mow the lawn, it kind of sprouts out in different ways. Like, I've noticed all these other like little fringy kind of cool things that have been happening. So people are channeling it in other ways. And of course, it's always been tough because let's be candid, most people want musicians to play for free. people want this stuff for free. And I understand that. I mean, everyone wants everything for free, but it's a business. It's show business. You know, people are making a quid out of it. But,
I think where the great divide there is that musicians probably would play for free if there was a minimum wage, or, you know, they talk about the universal wage or whatever that is. I'm not an expert on that. But when you look at the gross amount that the entertainment industry brings to our economy every year, if you think of that sum, it's actually it's been reported that it's more than the mining sector. It's, you know, it's outdoes so many other sectors or other industries. But then when you bring it down to, you know, seeing Jeff in the street who plays in a band full time or whatever it is, and you ask him how much he's earning or whatever, and you get down to the nitty-gritties of it, you just sort of ask yourself, why is this industry worth so much money, yet there are so many people that are on the breadline, or so many people that end up in retirement without superannuation, or, you know, like I've seen that so many times where you meet people and they're ready to retire and they've given everything to the spirit of music or to art or whatever, and they've ended up with nothing. It's not to say that they're bad people, that they're disorganized people or anything like that. It's just this great divide between the wealth and the industry. So yeah, there is a narrative that, you know, that you can get music for free, and you can. There is a narrative as well is that if you do have a great deal of talent and you work really hard, like really hard, that you will get that some of that pool of wealth. It's just incredibly hard, and I think that a lot of people sort of get to a certain level with it, and they're sort of comfortable, and then they stick with that comfort for a while, and then that while turns into decades, and then, you know, that's when you sort of have situations where it's like, oh wow, this guy's a poor for, you know, a reason or whatever it is. Yeah, so it's a really interesting thing. Whereas if you sort of look at mining, if you look at health, you look at different areas where the government actually is involved with the industry and they've got a finger on the pulse, And if people are starting to fall under the bus, you know, you've got unions that pull people out and increase wages and make sure that, you know, that things sort of even out with the wealth distribution with everybody within the industry is sort of, you know, always bigger at the top. But yeah, so that's my response to that.
I think, and I'm not asking you to agree with me, okay? It's the whole thing is, although we're not as well acquainted as I'd like, we've actually been acquainted for a long time now. So you don't have to agree with me. I'm just making a statement.
Yeah,
I think it's about, and I've thought about this a bit actually, Jeremiah. It's about the nature of wealth creation. Now, of course, music is a creative pursuit, and you can create something tangible eventually, like it goes into a record or a CD or something like that. But when you dig out, fundamentally, I suppose what I'm talking about is tangibility. So if you dig out a bit of metal from the ground, you smelt it, it gets value added by someone else, and it ends up as a phone or car or enamel cup. So you've got that degree of tangibility about it. So someone can kind of look at it and go, okay, a cup is worth this much. Whatever it is worth this much. Whereas because of the intangibility of music and the fact that it's subjective, I like you too, and I'd be happy to pay $20 for a CD. But a lot of people would go, man, I just loathe those guys. There is no way I would pay that. Some people listen to your music, like me, and man, I'd happily pay, $20-$30 for a bit of Jeremiah's funky, bluesy, folksy, cool music. But other people would go, I wouldn't. And again, that's the subjective nature of the industry that you're in. I mean, every different industry, and it is an industry, every different industry has a different risks, different issues associated with it. So, I mean, you can comment if you want, but that's just my opinion. I genuinely think about this because I love creativity, and I'm doing Northern Vibe. I write a little bit, and frankly, I'm hitting I kind of get it because Northern Vibe doesn't make any money. It's a hobby. It's a hobby thing. And, same sort of thing with the writing, candidly. So I feel your pain, bro.
Yeah. And it's interestingly enough, it's kind of what gives you an edge too, because I remember a time when I decided that I was just going to play music on my own by myself, write my own music, do my business management, all that kind of stuff. And it got to the point where I realized really quickly that if you follow the narrative of musicians don't get paid well, you won't get paid well. If you follow the narrative of it's really, really hard and you're going to have a hard time, it will be really hard for you and you will have a hard time. It's the same with everything else. Music is very much like that. It pins you to the wall and it says, or art, it pins you to the wall and it says, is this what you're really going to do? And you say, not only is it what I'm going to do, it's not a want, it's a need. This is something that I have to do. I have to get out of bed and I have to do this. And then once you do that, what ends up happening is when you hear somebody say musicians don't get paid well, you find yourself saying things like, oh, which gigs don't pay well? And then, some people will say, oh, this one doesn't pay well, or they never pay, or whatever else. So you go and test the water and you might find out that what they're saying is true. So you don't really want to deal with those people because they're not exchanging or they're not monetizing your time and the effort that you're putting into the presentation. So you move on to the next person, you create a new relationship with whoever it is, and you present yourself and say, this is what I do, give me a run or whatever, however you're going to pitch it to them. And then you give them everything. And when they respond well, when you go back, you give them more because this is something that you love to do. And then what happens is whatever you asked, like the money was arranged that you wanted, they will give it to you. And then a couple of years time, when you increase your rate, that will really, test the water as to whether they still really, appreciate what you do. And usually what happens is they do. You'll grow with them as sort of like a business relationship, but also an appreciation. And usually what ends up happening there is that you rule out the psychology of the victim or poor me. I'm a poor musician, I don't get paid, all that kind of stuff, because that will just kill anybody. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do, whether you play sport and you walk out on the field and you say, oh, I'm not a good player, or it's like, well, why are you here? You must know there's something about you that's good that works for the team, so you got to work with that. And then also you've got to be really realistic about what your talent is kind of worth. And that's where sort of like working in the field, you start to gauge things. You go and see somebody who has been touring for 10 years, 15 years, 30 years, and you find out that they're charging tens of thousands of dollars for one show. You look at them and you go, well, of course, they've built themselves up to that point. They've given up the time of their life for their art, all that. They've been through all of the hard stages where you don't get paid well. And then all of a sudden you've gone to see them and you go, well, I want to get paid as much as them because, I'm just as good. I can do this, pretty good. And, I want the money. It's not about that. It's about, you have to be in it for a long time to be able to earn respect from other people to warrant paying you money, or the money that your talent is worth. And then it's also looking back and just sort of going, okay, well, I used to play for this much and I used to play like that. And then you just sort of go, well, I've developed from that and I feel okay now that I'm going to charge this. And I feel okay because I can recognize a talent in what I do. So it's not so much looking at the talent of everybody else and thinking I'm better than them, so I deserve more. That's not it at all. It's actually looking at your own game and just sort of going, I've developed to a point and I'm realistic about it, because I look at the people that are, headlining at festivals and stuff like that. And I look at them and I think, well, I'm playing festivals. It's the exact same stage. It's the same speakers and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
The only difference is the talent. And I look at these people and I go, they are incredibly talented. They have really, really honed this in. And it's not so much about the money. It's just that they've just nailed their game. And, if they've got a manager representing them and asking them for a certain amount of money, well, that's their own story. I mean, that's how they've got to live in life. And maybe they're getting way more than me, but they don't know how to spend it. Maybe they're getting way more than me and they're not happy. There's so many variables in that. So knowing who you are as an artist or a human being as a person, and then being realistic about where you are with your development, that's a huge, big thing. Yeah.
Wow. That's so cool and insightful. There's so many things that really piques my interest with that. Firstly, it seems to me that there's a degree of self-affirmation there. So this idea is like, I will become this. I am going to develop myself. So you're comparing yourself. So while there is still an objective, I really would like to be as good as Meatloaf or U2 or whatever your kind of end goal aim is. But with the development thing, rather than comparing yourself to who they are now, you're comparing yourself to who you were yesterday. So you're going, well, actually, I'm developed. This is what I was doing yesterday. I've developed beyond that, and I'm worth more than that. And I'm going to assert that. I'm going to say that. I'm going to ask that, and the universe will kind of give it back to me. I think that's really cool.
I think that's the only way to operate, because really, well, I do know of other people, I've heard it in interviews where they were a little kid and they were watching U2 and they were like, I'm going to be U2. And they did. And that's, that was their manifestation. That was their dream. I don't think I was ever that person. And if anything, it kind of made me a little bit nervous to think like that. To me, it just sort of felt like that's not my personality. Like I don't feel like, and I haven't come from a family background either. So there's a lot of psychological conditioning that's built into this stuff. Some people are born eccentric and they are talented and they captivate people, and you go and see them and they're amazing and they're articulate with their art form or whatever it is, and we just throw money at them. And then there are people that are just like, I've got to be the number one guitarist, or I've got to be the number one singer-songwriter, or, you know, whatever it is, I've got to be number one. I've seen that go bad for for a lot of people. And I think I was not raised that way. I was raised by people that, you know, for a lot of the time through the 90s, if you sort of stuck your head out too far, there'd be someone there to, you know, to beat you about, to say, hey, you're not better than anybody else. Don't try and be any better than anybody else. It's different when you go to the US. If you've got an idea, like in the United States of America, you come up with an idea, you want to be a musician, you want to whatever, there'll be people that'll be like, yeah, we're going to support you, and we're going to, you know, they're over enthusiastic, and they sort of like help you drive the message home of like what you really want to do. That to me is a little bit daunting. And I think the times where I've been around people like that, it's like, oh, wow, that'd be so great to get some help with this stuff. But then I pull back and just sort of think, no, they're now manifesting what they think I am as to where it's going to head. And I've always felt sort of pretty, I've been really cautious of that, where I just sort of find like the greatest people, the greatest people that I know, whether it's sports people or talented musicians or artists, people in society, in all of their roles, they're usually people that are intelligent, and they're focused on the process of what they're doing, not so much the goal. And that's how I sort of look at it. I don't see that there's an end goal. I've got it written down on a few pieces of paper where I'd say, oh, gee, I'd like to earn this much money, and I would like to, you know, this, and this. And I look at them every now and again, and I'll be like, oh, wow, yeah, I can let myself have that. That'd be really cool. You know, I'm allowed to have that. But I always sort of come back to what I'm doing and go, oh, but to have that, I've got to do so much work here, and I've got to continue in that process and enjoy that process, because that's the goal, is the process. I don't sort of do the Anthony Robbins thing and have a picture board on the fridge that shows a Lamborghini and, you know, a massive house and stuff like that, because I've met so many people that get that, like that's their goal. And then that's it. They've got it, and they just feel hollow and empty. And you just sort of think, no, I want to be an older man. I want to live longer, and I want to be better at playing music, whether it's on the street busking, whether it's at shows, or whether it's just with some friends at a barbecue, or whether it's at home, and just look at it and go, oh, wow, I'm still developing, you know, like that's the greatest riches. Yeah. The greatest riches of all.
Well, it's true. Right up in that assumption as well, as people fall in love with the idea of something. They don't understand what it actually means. Like becoming successful in anything means a lot of hard graft. So if you want to be a successful musician, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I stopped playing the recorder in grade 5, but I would imagine like, yeah. Actually, my teacher took it off me. It's like, Matthew, this isn't for you.
Hey, it's never too late.
Because people just see this, you know, the lights and the money and with Bono wearing his pink sunglasses and all that, you know, and the chicks and yeah, you know, Kim Kardashian throwing herself at you, or you know, whomever. If you're one of the ladies, some hunky guy throwing themselves at you, and that's what they kind of see. They don't understand. They like the idea rather than the practice. You got into music very young. You were songwriting while you were, I think it was 10, and started playing when you were 13. Could you tell us about that? And why, and what got you into it?
It was default from a learning dysfunction that I had that hadn't really been sort of focused on yet, but became more apparent a bit later on. So it's just the way my brain operates. I'm more of a creative thinker than a logical thinker. So when kids were saying, hey, I want to be a police officer or a fireman, I would think about that and go, I don't think I'd be able to do that. And I knew it inside me that I couldn't do it, because there's so many logical things in life that it just didn't make any sense. Politics made no sense. Basic things. I'm raising a child now who's almost 10, and he has logical, conceptual ideas about most things in the world, to the point where he's really close to making a decision about something. That didn't happen for me really, I think, maybe till like 27. where I really sort of honed in on something. In the earlier days, it was just a form of expression where I was learning how to put words together, and I was hearing words and trying to find the power or the meaning of the words, and then also just sort of playing with them the way children play with things. They get a brand new set of blocks or whatever, they do a bunch of things with them until, you know, Lego, you give them a bunch of Lego, and then they build a house, but it's a really wonky kind of a house, and then eventually they get a few ideas and they build something, you know, a bit more sort of structured. That's how it's been with me and words. So that was the 10-year-old in me, where I was kind of writing a bunch of cryptic sort of poetry and stuff, and then still trying to, you know, get help from school to try and make some kind of meaning out of it. So first it became poetry, and then eventually it was kind of like cryptic lyrics. And then a friend that I grew up with sort of, you know, we sort of go riding push bikes together and collect junk at the local tip before, you know, the restrictions around the tip and stuff like that. You ride your push bike down there and you could get speakers out of cars, and there was nobody around to check on you. And, you know, so we used to go back with a bunch of junk and hang out with his place, and he had an electric guitar. And anyway, just as one of my interests, he came over one day and he was like, you know, so what do you do? Because I lived out on a farm and lived away from people and things like that. And I was like, well, I write. So I showed him some of the writing, and he was he's a great human being even to this day. He recognized it at a young age to say, these will make really great lyrics. These are, you know, sort of, he was sort of talking at the time about sort of Kurt Cobain or whatever. He was sort of, it was kind of like in that vein of, it was on, you know, on the side of cryptic, but still, you know, poetically okay. And it was sort of fitting. And he was like, these are going to be lyrics and you're going to be the singer of my new band. You know, it was like that kind of thing. And then so I met up with him and we sort of, you know, he would just play guitar. And to me, it just sounded like somebody cutting metal with a chainsaw. I found it terrifying. And, you know, like I still remember being in that room and just sort of like overcoming the fear of just sort of like, oh, you know, like I have to work with this terrifying sound and I have to put words onto it. And then eventually I just sort of came out with a bunch of stuff, you know, that a kid would or whatever. And then he genuinely sat back and went, that was actually pretty good. You know, you've got something there. So anyway, he being the great person that he was, he would sort of not only would he find sort of, you know, trash at the tip and make good things out of them, he also saw that when people in society weren't fitting in or at school weren't fitting in, he would make friends with them and he would pull them together. So he pulled together a bunch of guys that, you know, were kind of just sort of like, you know, who are these guys and what's going on with them? And like, oh, he plays drums. All right, okay. What about this guy? He plays bass. Oh, wow, really? Okay. Next thing you know, we've got a band and we're jamming at his garage and his parents are like, wow, this is, you know, you guys have got something going on here. We're going to support it. Just like, you know, other parents support children in going to sport or whatever. So I found my thing at that point in time. And then it was just sort of like a dog with a bone, I suppose. I was still pretty lazy though at that point. And but words were my thing. And then eventually that, you know, chainsaw tearing at the metal thing, which was the guitar, became my thing. I was like, I need to control the sound of this, you know, like this thing. And because I had hypersensitive hearing and a bunch of other things going on. So that's where it started in the early parts. And then I just sort of stuck with it. Other people had sport, you know, when you're that young, you kind of identify with something so that other people know who you are and all that kind of stuff. And that's when you get your nicknames and all of that kind of thing. And then it just sort of stuck. And yeah, and it's just sort of been difficult ever since. But you know, it hasn't got much easier. It's still sometimes, you know, the sounds do sometimes to you know, it's you know, the guitar sometimes can be a very confusing instrument for me audibly. Sometimes I'll lose sometimes when I'm playing with a band, to describe it is it sometimes it can get confusing. Like I sort of confuse what I'm hearing, and so I have to pull it all in and just trust what I'm doing, and then it's sort of, I'm okay with it. But I do have times where it's still kind of difficult. But yeah, so that's been the journey.
Wow. So did you choose music, or did music choose you?
I think the art form of words being put together, and then I think music said, hey, your words belong with us. And then I think creatively I was already thinking about things, you know, differently, or backward, or juxtapose, or that kind of thing. So the art form was there. I was comfortable with the idea of art and the art form, and a lot of it too was my brother. He was a visual artist. My mum could draw quite well, and my brother was listening to great music. He was already listening to you know, Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan. He was listening to the greats of music. And my father, who was, you know, not into music at all, he had an incredible record collection, and he had a really good taste in music. And so that helped me develop the art form and try and work out, you know, like, where's my place in all this?
So
yeah.
who are your influences music wise, and how do you categorize yourself?
Yeah, great question. I think musically that changes. I think what I'm looking for in music is I'm looking for what's timeless or what's great. You know, it's sort of, I can listen to a pop song and go, yeah, it just sounds like it's making me feel guilty that I'm not down at the gym exercising, you know. And then to me, I'm like, no, you didn't get me. Then I'll listen to another pop song, and I'm like, oh, this is so cheesy. And then I get into it, and I'm like, actually, this is a damn good pop song, like that. But you know, and then I get inspired by it, and I'll listen to it, you know, a lot over a month or two. And you know, people will say, what are you listening to? You know, and it's just, I think maybe it's just the way that I'm listening to it that brings some kind of inspiration. It's not so much the artist a lot of the time. I just sort of feel like there are some artists, if I'm sort of playing sort of folk music, if I'm drawing upon traditional blues, and I'm drawing upon folk style singer-songwriter, male singer-songwriters with an acoustic guitar, I've got like a long list of people from, you know, Loudon Wainwright III to Bruce Coburn to Richard Thompson. And it sort of goes from that spectrum, it sort of moves across into rock and roll, and you know, all the different sort of, you know, ways that songs are put together and music is made from it, using sort of like one person and a guitar, so to speak. I think what I'm looking for is just greatness. You know, like if I hear a song and I just think, oh, wow, that is actually great. And then I go and find the video and I can see the person, they've got incredible technique, and their lyrics are on point, and it's aging well, and the melody's nice. Like I'm enjoying the melody or whatever. I just go, doesn't matter who the artist and how they're presenting themselves. I'm like, there's greatness there, you know, and I've got so much to learn from whatever that is. So that should answer that question, I think. Yeah.
So yeah, it answers it quite fully, but it does raise another immediate one, because you started talking about inspiration there. So what happens with you? Like, do the creative muses come walking up to you at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is, and tap on the outside or the inside of your head and go, hey, get up and start writing? Or can you sit yourself down and sort of like, all right, Jeremiah, I want a song today, or I want this today, you're going to deliver it? Or is it a combination of both? How do you channel your inspiration and creativity? Because again, like it's a passion, but it's more than a passion.
Yeah, that crosses over into sanity, and that also crosses over into mental well-being. So what I've found is that I'm always creative. I don't have writer's block. It's never a problem. I think musically there's so much that I can advance on, and I think, you know, like with literature and with words, I can always advance on that as well. I think the creative side and the way my brain works is that it's always functioning at that creative level. sometimes that can be really distracting if I've got to do logical things. So that sort of, I have to sort of pull it in a little bit. And, you know, like if if I've got to concentrate on something and sort of like focus on something, sometimes it can be fatiguing because my mind just wants to relax and create something to feel comfortable. So then that's how it started. Then it got to the point where I'm now starting to form these things called songs, or I'm starting to contribute with other people to form these things called songs or music, or, you know, just audible sound that's recreated in the same patterns. And I think what ended up happening is that I could pick a tune. If somebody said, hey, this is my new song or whatever, I'd be like, no, that actually sounds like Queen, We Will Rock You. We can't do that. So I've always been around people that will pull things apart and just go, no, you can't do that. You have to come up with something more creative. And so I went down the rabbit hole of just blocking out traditional music, or just blocking out music as it was, and just trying to pull out of my, you know, from the muse, just give me something that's not like anything else. Even if it sounds bad, I don't care. Just, you know, give it, and I'll pull something out and just go, here it is. This is my new idea. And people wouldn't object to it. They would just sort of go, okay, you know, sure, people would say that idea sucks, or they don't like it. Or some people would be like, oh, wow, this is amazing, and then run with it and get excited about it. And then at some point, I sort of went down the spiritual path. Well, spirituality has kind of always sort of been with me, maybe from grandparents suggesting different things or whatever, and just being sensitive, I suppose. Then I got into this idea that it was a spiritual thing. And that's kind of dangerous because I come from a traditional middle class, you know, colonial Australian family. And, you know, I'm not a traditional, you know, tabla player that's, you know, it's been generational kind of a thing, as spirituality is woven in with the music. That's not true at all for me. So eventually what I kind of decided is I've got a bit of muse there that I can extract from. I've got a little bit of spirituality there, which is kind of like the unknown, you know, like maybe it's God's gift. And then I've also got to be real about it and go, at my age, that my subconscious is actually saturated with so much music that I've paid attention to, that if I come up with an idea, I can't just say it's a spiritual idea, because I can't tell the difference between a spiritual idea, an idea that I've pulled directly from a muse, or something that's come from my subconscious. My subconscious has arranged an idea from a bunch of all of these, you know, years and years of ideas, has pulled it forward, and I've gone, oh, well, that's a great idea, I'll work with that. So I'm kind of have that in perspective now, and yeah, I get to play with it a little bit, which is nice, and just not take it too seriously. The times where I start to take it too seriously, it does shrink up a little bit. Then when you asked about, hey, Jeremiah, going to sit down and write a song today, that is true and not true at the same time. I think that there's some days that I just cannot finish a song, but I might have 3 ideas that formulate into great songs later, after I sort of panel beat them for months and months until get the greatness. Sometimes a song will just happen straight away and it's already as great as I can make it. It's an accumulative thing of, you know, like your musical subconscious and all those things that we were just sort of talking about, and it just seems to write itself, and other artists say this too, and it's done. And then you look at it and you go, oh, you feel sort of like not good or bad about it, and then you put it down and you come back to it the next day and you go, that song's finished, that's done. And you just sort of say to yourself, well, why can't I do that every day? And then you know, you just sort of go, well, maybe I'm not a musical genius. And so the other thing related to that is that sort of has to be a discipline. I've heard people like Nick Cave say that he just goes to it like an office job. And that's how I kind of feel about it too. I really sort of feel like I have to allocate the time and I have to do it. And then that seems to keep it all alive. Like that seems to keep it in, it keeps it real. If I start to get too washy with it, or if I start talking about it too much as being some kind of ethereal thing or whatever, I don't feel like I get greatness out of it. I kind of feel like it just starts getting flaky, and then I end up with a bunch of songs that I'm not happy with. Whereas the discipline's there and I keep working on it and molding it, then I seem to get whatever results I'm getting.
Wow. But like, how do you, I gotta stop saying wow, but I get overwhelmed by all these conversations I have with people. It's like the magnificent thing about Northern Vibe is, and I really appreciate your candor. This is a great interview. I'm really enjoying this, and I'm trying to look something up that I want to bounce off you, but I can't multitask. So I'm going to focus on this for a second. But how do you know? One of the things that struck me was, and I do try and get creative. How do you know when it's done? Look, because you said up that's done. Because I've come back to stuff that I thought, man, I was really happy with that, and come back to it and just was reading over it like later on, a little while down the track, and go, well, it's not bad, but this, you know what I mean? It's, and I've heard of artists, and I've forgotten who the name of the artist was, but they were really famous. Apparently they got in trouble. I really wish I remembered the name of the person. This person was looking at one of their own paintings in a museum that had been sold to a museum, and the museum staff didn't know that it was the artist. So he goes outside to his car, gets his paintbrush, comes walking in and starts like dabbing these people, like, hey, move away from them. Like, and he's like, it's my painting, I painted it. And they're like, well, no, it's no longer your painting. We bought it. So like, you might have painted it, but do we need to explain intellectual property? We own it now. What you created it, but it's ours. Step away from the painting. And but he was genuinely shocked that he wasn't allowed to go in there and, like, you know what I mean? How do you know? How do you know when you're done?
I think as a general thing that all artists say that the work is never completed. But I think also there's another rule as well, and that is that your art becomes a record of your timeline of life. And I know that might sound a bit sort of ethereal or whatever, but really when we think about music, you know, a lot of great music was recorded in the 60s, and it was recorded on analog tapes, and it was the band and the drummer counted it in, and they pressed record, and if they played it well, they kept it. If they didn't play it so well, somebody would stop it, and then they would do it again. And then what happened is because they may not have had a extensive budget or whatever it is, and the process of recording that way is kind of difficult and time consuming and all that kind of stuff. They had to get to a point where they cut it off, and the artist might not be happy, or they may be happy. And what they end up with is what we call a record. And that record, as we know it, we see it as a product or something that we buy from the record store or whatever. We don't think about it often as being like a police record or whatever else, but it's the exact same thing. It's like at this point in time, this person made this thing and they documented it this way. Okay. And then that's it. Now you can go and see them perform that song later on if it's a musical record, and you can make another record of that same song at that point in time, or the artist may say, that song's finished and we're never playing that again. So I think there's varying degrees as to when something is finished. I think for the musician who recorded the song and gets to play it over and over again, they always get to tweak it just a little bit, not enough to, change it so much that their audience no longer likes it or they've lost the connection with it. So I think that's kind of like when you've finished, you've sort of, I just sort of look at things in the past and I go, oh, that wasn't great. And then I go, yes, but that was you then. It's just like looking at your haircut in a photograph from high school or something, ooh.
And anything with Stussy written on it, it was from the 90s. Obviously, you're a musician. Music is what you do. But if there's an aspiring creative out there, what's your message to them?
getting lost in the process is the number one thing. And then also just learning about, you know, like what art is itself, rather than just sort of going, okay, well, I'm going to be a musician and this is whatever. I think it's really having an art practice first and then developing it into whatever that form is. Because like you were saying before, Matt, you're a writer now, you are writing, doesn't define who you are as a person. And it doesn't say that that's not just your pathway as an artist to becoming the artist that you want to be. You might become a visual artist just by writing, or you might become something else. So I think like focusing on what the actual art practice is that you are, that you want to have fun playing with, I think is the most important thing, because that's the only thing that you'll ever have in this. I mean, if you exchange this for money, the money will disappear. It will go into rent, it will go into a house, it will go into your family, the money will disappear. But if you always look at the art as being something that you treasure and something that you want to develop, that is the ultimate goal in the process, is like you want to hang on to that. And then you might realize at some point that this art or this process is going to make you some money, or it's going to make you happy in other areas, whether it's going to find you a partner in life. You might decide that you don't want to do that art form anymore. The art form might then work across into a workflow as being a nurse, and you take your artistic practice and you learn from the workflow, and then you apply it into being a nurse. And then you look at your job holistically rather than just systematically. You get creative. You've got a different kind of person that you have to deal with here, so you have to think creatively with this person. They don't fit the picture that they're meant to, and then you think creatively, and then all of a sudden, bang, you've got it again. So you'll always have that joy. That would be my only kind of like words of wisdom that I've probably just heard other people say before, but it actually makes a lot of sense, and it feels good to have that as a focus.
It's so true. And that's when we talk about creativity, because we think the arts, we think music, we think writing, we think painting, we think these things. I was discussing this, but with this lady one day who said, oh, you know, I've always wanted to create something. And she was the mother of 5 children. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Yeah. So you and I are sitting here laughing and going,
you're doing it. You're
the ultimate creator. Like, there is no greater act of creation than what you've done. Like, really? And you don't see yourself as a creative?